Peatland destruction accounts for 5 to 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Part of these emissions are due to our peat use in gardening. What's behind this statement? Peat extraction is an open pit mining process, leading to irreversible landscape destruction. Peat is a fossil material. Extracting it leads to CO2 emissions and turns a CO2 sink into a CO2 source. However, CO2 emissions are just one of at least 10 different damage categories of peat extraction. Let's take a look at this ecological horror show one by one. Apart from greenhouse gas emissions, peat extraction leads to biodiversity loss. Land subsides, meaning that the typically flat and low-lying areas sink even deeper. The Netherlands has such large areas below sea level because of peat extraction we did in the past. Now we export that damage to other countries, a form of ecological post-colonialism. Drained peat bogs lose their sponge function, which is the prevention of floods and drafts. Surrounding waters no longer profit from the water clearance that undrained peat bogs bring and suffer from direct pollution. Peat bogs must be drained for decades to allow extraction, leading to a constant fire hazard. The local population suffers from fine dust emissions and a higher local temperature. The darker surface of the drained peat leads to an increase in the local temperature of about 2 degrees, which in turn leads to a reduction in rainfall. Failed harvests are the consequence. Due to the high level of mechanization, only very few jobs are created by this industry, which are unpleasant and unhealthy due to the dusty environment. Lastly, roads and other infrastructure need to be built, mostly on peatlands, that need to be drained for decades to support this infrastructure. Therefore, CO2 accounting only catches a part of the overall ecological damage of peat extraction. Let's look at the carbon footprint. On a global scale, peat fires in Siberia and Indonesia and peatland drainage for agriculture are the biggest contributors to peatland-related greenhouse gas emissions. 5 to 7% might not sound like a lot, but it's enormous when we put it in relation to other emissions. For example, aviation is responsible for 2.5 to 4.5% of the global emissions. Zooming into the Netherlands, about 4 to 5% of the greenhouse gas emissions are related to peatland destruction. This is almost on par with our 6 to 7% aviation-related emissions. We're a rich country, so we fly much more than poor ones. The most significant part of the Dutch peatland-related emissions is due to farmland drainage. Peat imported for potting soil accounts for about 0.5% of our emissions. This means that the potting soils we use for our greenhouses and gardens emit more greenhouse gas than the city of Lelystad. Their mobility, heating, and building their houses, eating, and all other activities. The 0.5% greenhouse gas emissions for peat extraction only account for the emissions directly related to the extraction and use of peat, not the 9 other damage categories we showed you. Now you know why we don't communicate with the 0.5% figure. It simply doesn't reflect the complete picture of the environmental destruction that peat extraction brings with it.